there. It's like you're a work of art. Which one do you like the best?
last time I was here, it took him so long to get out here that I was like, screw it, I'm going.
He's been going first usually.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's just they just pick their best bets.
You didn't bring your coffee or dessert or anything? Likewise. He's got a good question. Somebody's going to turn and look at us for like 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah, good long, like reasoned answer. Like a three-parter, you got to...
Maybe I'll do like a 45-second line. I'll clear my throat. But no one does that on TV.
That's right.
Yeah, we would love to.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to our first little meeting on Tuesdays in the new session. And I want to thank you all for joining me. And we have a new leadership team, Senators Durbin, Stabenow, and Klobuchar. Senator Murray, as you know, is now not in the leadership because she's the Senate Pro Tem, although she comes to our meetings and we take her input because she's so great. Okay, and I'm going to have to be quick today because we're headed to the White House this afternoon, as you know. But before I go, I wanted to tell you about the productive lunch we had and what we've laid out for the few weeks ahead. First, we want to continue our successes in the last Congress and continue delivering for the American people. This was the most successful 2 years in decades. Many people compare it to the Great Society favorably or equally, some even New Deal because of what we did on climate. So we want to continue doing that, and we want to continue working in a bipartisan way wherever we can. But unfortunately right now, House Republicans, at least where they seem to be headed, have different ideas. On the very first day of votes, they made their first order of business to make it easier for the ultra-rich tax cheats to escape accountability, at the same time blowing a $100 billion hole in the deficit. They say they care about the deficit, but they seem to care more about making sure that those very, very wealthy people who use lawyers and accountants to go through all kinds of loopholes and pay a lower percentage than the average American, that seems to be what they care about, because they actually created a hole in the deficit by preventing us from collecting money from those people. And that's what CBO said, not us. And speaking of the deficit, we're now witnessing the House GOP recklessly flirt with default. Listen, it's clear. Default would be a catastrophe for American working families. It's not an abstract issue. It's going to affect every American family severely and adversely. And playing brinksmanship, taking hostages, is being risky and not caring about average people. So let's look at some of it. If the MAGA GOP stops paying our nation's bills, Americans pay the price. Political brinksmanship would be a massive hit to local economies, American families, nothing less than an economic crisis. Here's what would happen. For instance, interest rates would go way up. If you have a home loan, the average person could pay tens of thousands of dollars more on their mortgage if they have a variable rate mortgage. It would hurt Social Security dramatically, hurt Medicare. The only people who will pay the price is partisan politics. Home values will go down, because when mortgage interest rates go up, home values go down. People have less money to buy a home because they're putting a lot into the mortgage. And now, listen to this. House Republicans, some of the House MAGA Republicans have asked their leadership, we hear that some House Republicans, from House Republicans, that their leadership has agreed to give GOP radicals a vote on a 30% national sales tax across the board. 30% sales tax on everything. Meaning right now, as inflation finally begins to drop, Republicans are looking to make American families pay 30% more for every single thing they buy. The Republican national sales tax is a disaster for American families. And you don't need to take it from me. Grover Norquist said the proposal is an assault on your retirement savings. He's hardly an ally of ours. Steve Forbes said it would raise house prices by $100,000 and raise American bills by thousands. There's nothing fair about this Republican sales tax. So if Republicans want to push this terrible proposal, they're welcome to make their case, make our day. Similarly, if Republicans want to play brinksmanship with deficit and demanding cuts, they need to show us exactly what they want to cut. They have said they're going to put all these bills on the floor, regular order, and have votes. Well, let's see what cuts they actually want to make, and let's see if they can pass any of them. I doubt it. I doubt it. So, to my GOP colleagues, if you want to talk about all this stuff, then you have an obligation to show the American people precisely what kind of cuts you want to make. Do you want to cut Social Security? Do you want to cut pay raises for our troops? Do you want to cut Medicare? Do you want to cut police? Do you want to cut helps for the veterans? Republicans owe the American people answers. In lunch, we agreed Senate Democrats are ready and united to roll up our sleeves and deliver for the American people. Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Chuck. The new MAGA majority in the House has promised us endless investigations, confrontations, impeachments, and chaos. And they also said that they want to play games with our national debt. Instead of paying our bills, which is our moral and legal obligation, they have decided to make a game of this. The closest thing that the new speaker has come to suggesting an approach he might follow is to suggest that he's going to eliminate wokeism from the defense budget. Class, do we have anyone who has a definition of wokeism for us here? Anybody? Anybody? Of course not. This is MAGA gibberish, which might make sense to those who are catatonic watching Fox TV, but it doesn't make sense to the American people, and it certainly doesn't address the responsibility which Congress has to pay our debts and get it done quickly. We are already suffering because of this suggested problem of passing the debt ceiling. Isn't it interesting? We did it 3 times during the Trump administration with bipartisan roll calls, and now, under the leadership of the current Speaker of the House, there's a question mark as to whether it will be done. While at the same time, Donald Trump was creating more than 25% of our national debt in 4 years. 230 years of American history, the national debt, Trump added 25% to it in 4 years. So let's not pose for holy pictures when it comes to budget balancing. Let's do our constitutional responsibility and pass the debt ceiling.
Senator Stabenow.
Well, good afternoon. It's great to be back with all of you. You know, Senate Republicans have a real choice to make now this year. They can work with us on behalf of the American people, or they can side with the House MAGA Republicans and create chaos while working to benefit the wealthy and the well-connected. We know which choice is better for the American people. But, as Senator Schumer said, the first order of business by House Republicans was voting to protect wealthy tax cheats. Now think about that. People in my state, you know, they're willing to contribute to the strength of America, but they think everybody ought to do that. Everybody ought to pay their fair share. And in fact, on top of everything else they're talking about, it was a move that ballooned the deficit by $140 billion. Of course, ballooning the deficit is a Republican specialty. Almost 30% of the national debt, the national public debt that we have today, was done during 4 years of Donald Trump. And they were willing to raise the debt ceiling, not once, not twice, 3 times during the Trump years, to make sure that they were paying for huge tax cuts to the wealthy and the well-connected. Now, fast forward to the Biden administration. The deficit has fallen by $1.4 trillion under President Biden, and we have the strongest job growth in a generation. There's a huge difference. So, by working with us, Senate Republicans have an opportunity to make life better for the American people. We can pass a bipartisan farm bill that will support our farmers and our families. We can responsibly make sure our country pays its bills. We can continue to create good-paying jobs, strengthening our national security, support veterans, ensure that seniors can retire with dignity. Meanwhile, House MAGA Republicans are creating chaos, playing chicken with America's checkbook, while proposing an agenda that will hurt American families and businesses from coast to coast. Senate Republicans have a choice: chaos or cooperation. We urge them, on behalf of the American people, to choose bipartisan cooperation so we can get things done. That's what the American people deserve.
Senator, and welcome for the first time.
The
as
first time
one of
ever at the
leadership
microphone.
Team. Not the first time here, but here we are. Senator from Minnesota.
Thank you, Chuck, and thanks for your leadership. So I spent the last few weeks at home in Minnesota, where despite the Vikings' loss, to the Giants, who later went on to not do well. Okay, it was a great game. It was a great game. All right, so I spent the last few weeks at home in the middle of a lot of snow and ice, but I visited 23 counties for 2023. And I was on the Canadian border, I was down in Rochester, and I can tell you, based on that, red counties, blue counties, talking to people in long-term care, what they want is to make sure that they can move forward. And they need workforce, they need child care, They need to make things more affordable. What they don't need is chaos. Over and over again, they said that to me. Think about the American people. We've been in hundreds of millions of silos because of the pandemic. We're now coming together. We're gathering together, moving businesses forward. The last thing they want to do is go backwards. They don't want to go backwards to January 6th and what happened right in this building, and they don't want to go backwards to what they just saw in the House of Representatives for that 3 days of hell. They want to move forward, and that means the international no sign over chaos. It means making things more affordable. It means being common sense. It means working across the aisle, which this Senate has shown it could do time and time again, with the bill that Senator Schumer led on semiconductor chips, with the work that we did together when it came to the infrastructure bill, with the work the Democrats did on allowing for prescription drug negotiation, as well as investing for the first time ever in a big way when it comes to climate change. People want to move forward. They don't want to see the chaos. It's as simple as that. And that's why in America we pay our bills and we do the right thing.
And just to underscore Amy's point, you look at the other side, it's total chaos. On our side, there's unity. I'll be going to the White House with our leadership team and with Leader Jeffries to continue to speak in one unified voice. Yes? Well, the bottom line is the debt ceiling has been done 3 times under Donald Trump, once under Biden, all in a bipartisan way with no brinksmanship or hostage-taking. That's where it's got to be. Yes. Yes.
Leader Schumer, can I ask you about the Arizona Senate race next year? If Senator Sinema runs, do you expect to support her or the Democratic nominee?
Look, Senator Sinema is an excellent Congress member and Senate member, and she has done a lot of good things here, but it's much too early to make a decision. Yes.
How concerned are you about the way that President Biden handled classified documents? Not only him, we're now learning about Vice President Mike Pence. And do you think it's time for the president to come out and tell the American people exactly what happened?
Look, there's a huge difference between how the president handled it and how former President Trump handled it. One cooperated fully with the authorities, the other stonewalled for over a year. And the bottom line is simple. There are prosecutors in both cases. They ought to be able to proceed unimpeded without anyone pressuring them.
But in 2019, before President Trump's 2020 reelect, you helped negotiate a 2-year budget deal as part of raising the debt ceiling, including $320 billion discretionary spending increase. Would you be open to negotiating with Republicans again in the same
I'm not going to negotiate in public. Obviously, again, we want to make sure that we negotiate a budget that's good for the average working family. We did that in the omnibus bill. We were very pleased with the outcome there, and hopefully it can be done again without brinksmanship. But I'm not going to get into specifics. Last one, Manu.
Given that we have learned about Mike Pence having these documents, is it not incumbent on the Senate to investigate, to have some sort of oversight to ensure that the nation's secrets aren't being leaked out everywhere in people's
Well,
private homes?
Senator Peters is looking at bipartisan legislation in terms of classified documents. I support his efforts. In the meantime, on the specific cases, the appropriate thing to do is have special prosecutor, and that's what's happening. Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone. I know the big question on your mind is the notification by the Secretary of the Treasury of the need to raise the debt ceiling. This is the beginning of the discussion that always occurs in the past, probably leading to some decision this summer. And you're probably wondering what role, if any, the Senate would play in this. As some of you recall, I've been through a few of these debt ceiling situations. The one that seems to stand out the most was in 2011 when I negotiated with then Vice President Joe Biden the Budget Control Act in conjunction with raising the debt ceiling. It actually worked. It reduced government spending for 2 years in a row for the first time since right after the Korean War. However, over the years, most of us on our side felt it was squeezing defense unrealistically. Democrats felt the same way on the domestic side, and we gradually pulled away from us. But if you were genuinely interested in cutting spending, it actually worked. At that time, the federal deficit, the federal debt was about $12 trillion. It's now $31 trillion. In the course of the last Congress, the Democrats, without a single Republican vote, racked up another $2.7 trillion on top of what had happened during the pandemic. So here's where I think we are. I can't imagine any kind of debt ceiling measure that could pass the Senate would also pass the House. So even though the debt ceiling could originate in either the House or the Senate, in this current situation, the debt ceiling fix, if there is one, or how it's to be dealt with, will have to come out of the House. So I think it's entirely reasonable for the new Speaker and his team to put spending reduction on the table. I wish him well in talking to the President. That's where a solution lies. Again, at the risk of repeating myself, I can't imagine any debt ceiling provision passed out of the Senate with 60 votes could actually pass this particular House. So I think the final solution to this particular episode lies between Speaker McCarthy and the President.
Last Friday marked 2 years since President Biden was sworn into office, and I think, without question, one of the biggest failures in his first 2 years in office is the absolute disaster we have at our southern border. If you look at the data, statistics, the numbers tell the story. December was the largest month, single month, largest number of people who were apprehended trying to, or I should say, who attempted illegal border crossings, and that was over 250,000 people. The number of gotaways is now 1.2 million people, and the last 3 months has averaged 70,000 per month. So the numbers continue to just get worse. The President finally took a trip to the southern border, and obviously what we're anxious to see now is what he learned on his trip, and is he actually going to do something? Because talking about it is one thing, but actually doing something to address this crisis is I think what the American people are looking for, and that's a solution. And there are lots of things he could do. I mean, starting with just enforcing the law. That would be a very simple place to start. He could reinstate Remain in Mexico policy. He could quit trying to do away with the Title 42 policy that has given our Border Patrol agents at least some wherewithal in order to stop people who are trying to come here illegally. He could end catch and release. And he could finish building the wall. There are a whole series of solutions, many of which are very obvious to, I think, a lot of people that the President and his administration, so far at least, have been unwilling to entertain. But this is a disaster. It is a humanitarian disaster. It is a law enforcement disaster. It is a national security crisis if you look at the number of people, not only the number, but the types of people who are now coming across our southern border. It's a solution which cries out, or a problem which cries out for a solution, and this administration, as I've said before, has been entirely missing in action, and it is high time that they engaged and tried to fix this problem, and those are a number of solutions that I think would work.
Yesterday, the President had his Secretary of Low Energy, Jennifer Granholm, make an announcement and a veto threat from the podium at the White House. It has to do with legislation that the House is about to pass that has to do with our emergency energy supply, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And it says if we withdraw more, we need a plan for exploration of energy in the United States to refill that. I've introduced similar legislation in the Senate. The reason this is so important is because our emergency supplies are now at a 40-year low. And we've gotten to that point because President Biden, in the run-up to the elections, withdrew from our strategic reserve 1 million barrels of oil each and every day for 6 months, 180 days, 180 million barrels of oil. And he started doing it when energy prices, gasoline was at $5 a gallon. People were feeling the pain at the pump. It's nice to see that the President finally admits that there is a relationship between supply and demand and the cost of energy and gasoline at the pump. But yet the President continues to respond to the climate crazies who call the tune at the White House, which is why they killed the Keystone XL pipeline and why he continues to hammer on oil and gas exploration in America. Well, the price of gasoline is going up again. The American people know what they want. They want energy that is affordable, available, and reliable. They want it from here at home. They don't want us going to Iran or begging Saudi Arabia or Venezuela for oil and energy. But yet this war on energy by President Biden has hurt our energy grid and has hurt our energy security. And you don't have to think back very far to see it. Look at what happened at Christmas time with the cold snap that hit the country. People across the country were told to lower their thermostat, turn off their Christmas lights, and don't plug in your electric vehicle because it was going to lead to brownouts or blackouts. And I'm not sure if the President or his sidekick, Secretary of Energy, even knows the fact that Vladimir Putin continues to subsidize the climate-crazy group of lobbyists and others who represent organizations that continue to lobby in this country against American energy. Putin has spent lots of money over a decade on this. These are the people that argue against pipelines, against energy infrastructure, against oil and gas exploration. In the meantime, my home state of Wyoming, energy breadbasket of America, is told we have to keep our affordable, available, and reliable energy in the ground. What's the President say he wants to do? Well, you heard the administration talking about banning gas stoves, and the President made a promise to the United Nations to send $11 billion each and every year to the UN for climate reparations. I am going to do absolutely everything I can as the ranking member of the Energy Committee in the Senate to make sure that the United States never, ever delivers on Joe Biden's promises.
Well, it is great to be here in our new Congress, and we do have a couple new leaders with us as we are coming forward today. I want to welcome my friend Shelley Moore Capito as our Vice Chair, and we have Senator Steve Daines as well joining us as the Chair of the NRSC. So exciting times, a lot of changes coming forward. But folks, the last 3 weeks, I've had some great quality time in the state of Iowa, and I have continued on visiting my counties. I was able to visit 33 different counties doing roundtables with farmers and those engaged in agriculture as we prepare for the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill reauthorization. I was able to meet with school groups, and I did a number of open public town halls, hearing from Iowans about all different topics. And what I find that is consistent with all of those meetings, all of those discussions, Iowans are really concerned about what's going on with this administration. The things that I heard about, number one, economy and inflation, and how it's hurting our farmers, our families, and our small businesses. I heard from students about their concerns with public education. Heard from those farmers as we did those roundtables about excessive government regulation, things like the new Biden-era Waters of the U.S. rule. So Iowans are feeling the pressure from this administration. They're very concerned about the direction that this administration is going. My commitment to those Iowans, I will continue to work hard for them and represent their voice here in Washington, D.C. as I make my way, literally, river to river in Iowa, or as we call it in Iowa, coast to coast, the Mississippi to the Missouri. So anyway, folks, it's good to be back in session, but we need to encourage the Democrats, get your act together, let's do right for the American people.
It's nice to be here as part of the leadership team, and I'm happy to be with all of you. I'm going to piggyback on what our leader, our whip said, Senator Thune, on illegal immigration. We saw the number, over 250,000 came through or were apprehended in the month of December, the most ever. But you know, there's a whole other aspect of this, not just the human aspect, the human trafficking and the getaways. There's the drug, deadly drug of fentanyl, which is streaming across our southern border in record amounts. It's not just coming through Texas, it's coming through Arizona and California in larger amounts than we've ever seen. It is the #1 killer for our people in America from the ages of 18 to 45. I know personally, in my state of West Virginia and in my small town, I know some of the folks who've lost their lives, who've lost their sons and daughters, who've lost their classmates, who've lost their very good friends from many, many years. And it's a human tragedy that because the administration has had 2 years to tighten the border, to put more controls, to find out who's coming, how they're coming, and where they're coming from, because we've had to divert resources over to have all of these folks interdicted as they're coming across our border because there's been no deterrence. All of these drugs are coming through and killing our fellow citizens. We are in the cartels in Mexico are being heavily enriched by this, the tune of billions of dollars, but it's not just Mexican cartels. It's Chinese cartels, it's worldwide crime units that are enriching themselves on the backs of our folks here in this country who are subjected to the flow of fentanyl. So we've got to, I just had a meeting with the DEA director. She is very concerned about this. She's trying to find different solutions to this. But if we see what's going on the border in terms of trying to disrupt the human flow, it is not having it is having a negative impact on our ability to interdict the flow of deadly fentanyl into this country.
Well, I'm glad to join the leadership team and join you all today for the stakeout. I want to speak for a few moments about what Senator Capito was also talking about, and that's what's going on in the southern border. Now, why would a senator from Montana, when you talk about being a border state, we're a border state with Canada. But Montana is a northern border state with a southern border crisis. It is fentanyl. It is fentanyl that's destroying our communities and creating lawlessness and record levels of crime and record levels of death in Montana. And this fentanyl is coming directly from the Mexican cartels. Sadly, the Biden administration is not doing anything to control the southern border. It is a solvable problem, as Senator Thune laid out, the pieces of what we need to do going forward. But the reality is, we look in Montana, our fentanyl deaths last year were up 1,100% versus 2017. It's the leading cause of death for young people in our country. You look at seizures of fentanyl by our law enforcement in Montana, more fentanyl was seized by law enforcement in Montana in the first 3 quarters of 2022. We're still waiting for the fourth quarter report. Than the prior 4 years combined. And lastly, when you take a look at who we saw come across the southern border that we know of in December at our all-time record level, up 40% year over year, there were 17 names that popped on the terror watch list. So the southern border is a humanitarian crisis. It's also a crime crisis, and it's a deadly crisis affecting states like Montana.
Leader McConnell.
What is your level of concern about classified records showing up at Joe Biden's home? And now we're learning about what happened with Mike Pence. And what specifically should Congress do to prevent this from happening again?
Well, with regard to how the Justice Department handles it, I think they ought to treat everybody the same who has misplaced classified documents. It seems so far as if the Attorney General is making an effort to do that, and beyond treating everybody the same, I don't really have any additional advice.
Leader McConnell, I'm wondering, so do you think that this sort of hardline negotiation tactic that House Republicans are using with regards to the debt limit is necessary in order to get the debt under control?
Do I think what?
Do you think the sort of hardline negotiation tactic that some House Republicans are trying to use to force negotiation by holding the debt limit in question, do you think that's needed in order to make
Well, as I said earlier, I think if this isn't a good time to talk about the debt, I don't know when that is. And the debt ceiling does provide an opportunity to enter into a discussion about what Admiral Mullen said years ago when asked what was our biggest national security threat. He said it was the debt. And it's only gotten worse. Now, during the pandemic, there was broad agreement on a bipartisan basis that we had to do what we did. As the pandemic ended and we began to go back to normal, not a single Republican supported either of the 2 reconciliation proposals last year that added about $2.7 trillion to the spending spree. This is a good time to talk about it, to try to get an outcome. But the second part of what I said was, I can't imagine any debt ceiling agreement that would get 60 votes in the Senate that would have any chance of passing the House. So the solution to this problem needs to be negotiated between the Speaker and the President.
Do you think President Biden's possession of classified documents at his home in Washington office could rise to the level of an impeachable offense?
I don't have an answer to that hypothetical. I do think the Justice Department seems to be willing to treat everybody the same and to try to retrieve the documents. And obviously, it's not a great idea to take classified documents away from the archives, and we'll see how they continue to handle it. Yeah.
So some of the documents found at President Biden's home date back to his time in the Senate. You've obviously been around the Senate for a good amount of time. So has the process for handling classified documents as a senator changed over time in your view?
I never knew it was possible to take classified documents out of the SCIF. So most of us don't think there's any way of getting it out of the SCIF, much less bringing it to your office or taking it home.
Do you want Senator Sinema to run for re-election as an independent?
Look, Senator Sinema has been an important part of the United States Senate. The most important thing she did was to save the institution itself by protecting the filibuster. She's also been a significant part of the bipartisan agreements that have been reached in the Senate. As to whether or not she chooses to run again, it's really her decision. And I think it is a big dilemma for the Senate Democratic majority to decide whether to support her or to support somebody running on the Democratic ticket. And I'm pretty sure you were asking a bunch of questions along those lines right before we came out here. I look forward to reading what answers, if any, you got.
Senator McConnell, should